All right, so we are looking at Google Forms, which I like to think are the greatest thing since sliced spread. We've all filled out a Google form, but we just want to make sure that from scratch that we know all the basics. What are the basics of making a Google form? And I think part of my problem here is I've been making Google Forms for so long, it feels like breathing. So you ever try to teach someone how to drive and you're like, not sure what I do. And you make them get out of the passenger seat or the driver's seat so you can sit there for a few seconds and think about what you actually do. And like, okay, now try this. So I think we might have a little bit of that going on. So I went through and I made a quick form before this as I thought of like, what are the things that I do when I just go to make a form really quick? So, we're going to create a form and I'm going to cover what that means. Okay. I asked for their name. So I have a question, ask for their name. And then how do we add another question? And what are the types of questions? So there's some different question types. And then you want to think about requiring a question. And this might not be the basics, but I would like to talk about sections. I like sections. And then how to require an email address. So here's my first thing that I'd like to tell you is if you don't ask for something, you can't remember later. Like, oh, I forgot to ask for their email address. How do I get that? You can't. I needed to know what grade they were in. Too bad. If you forget to ask their name, you didn't ask. You cannot know what you did not ask. So to set your Google Forms so they always require an email address, I highly recommend. So that way you mess up less, because it's just going to do it. Now, any forms that you've already made, you got to go back in and edit those. They're asking for email address. So if you've already made it, doing the setting that I'm going to show you at the end will not be retroactive, just so you know. Okay, but I'm going to assume you have no idea how to make a form. So to create a form, there are a couple of things. You have some options. Right? So your first option is you can go to Google Drive. Forms live in Google Drive. Your other option is you can go to forms.google.com. So I don't know if you know this, but all the Google products are the product.google.com, like drive.google.com, docs.google.com, forms.google.com, slides.google.com, sheets.google.com, maps.google.com. Like they're all like that. Even Gmail, I'm pretty sure if I go to mail.google.com, I put an equal sign in there. Let me try it. Mail.google.com, right? It's mail. So if I go to mail.google.com, it's in my Gmail. Okay? So you can make your decision. You can go to forms.google.com, and then my favorite is just forms.new. That works for like everything. It's like docs.new, slides.new, sheets.new, whatever it is. If you do .new, jam.new, it makes a new one. So let's start with that one because it's my favorite. So if you would please open a new tab. So you're looking at a new tab and type, no, we're not doing yet. We're doing forms.new. Forms.new. Now here's the problem with this. It creates me a new Google form, but this form is floating around in my drive, not organized in a folder. So that's the downside. If you want it to be made in a folder, you might want to go to Google Drive first, find a folder, make it in the folder. We're going to do that second. Now you'll notice that this new form that I just made says email address. This form is collecting email addresses. And the reason that it's doing that is because I have turned on my settings that when I have a new form, it automatically collects email addresses. We're going to do that later. So don't worry about that. What I'd like you to do right now is where it says Untitled Form, do Quick Form. And then up here in the left next to the icon, now notice that if you click on the icon, don't do it. If you click on the icon, it takes you to forms.google.com. Now, forms.google.com is Google Drive. It is completely Google Drive. It's just a filter for your Google Forms. But to the right of it, where it says Untitled Form, I want you to understand that when you click up there, it'll try to match it so that the document name, the form name, and the form title match. But they're not actually the same thing. Usually, they're the same thing. So it'll default to that. So if you type the title and then click up in the corner, it puts it up there. It just like pastes it up there for you. So that's nice. So I recommend the first thing you do is you make the title and then click up in the upper left to name it so that they match. If you don't want them to match, understand that what's in that upper left-hand corner is what you see in Google Drive. So that might be where you put like 2021, so you know it's a form for this year, whereas the person filling out the form doesn't need to see the date in it or the version number. Underneath the title, it says quick form, it says form description. That's where you can just give them a description about this form, some information they need to know about it. Now you'll notice I typed http://alicekeeler.com. And it's not hyperlinked, but you'll notice when someone fills out the form, it is. If you include the http:// when you put a link, like a link to a rubric or link, like read this reading passage, come back and answer these questions. It will be a live link. So I can't add a button, but I can add a live link just by including the HTTP. Now, I've noticed here that I realized something that I left off is the eyeball. So I'm going to need to add that to my list. I need to include giving someone the form to fill out. Oh, we also need create a spreadsheet. This is what I told you. I go, this is going to be, it's like breathing. I've made so many Google Forms. It's like, what are all the things that you do? So let's keep it to the basics. Where it says untitled question. So you'll notice it defaults to having a question for you. I'm going to do first name. And this was exciting. It went fast. You might not have noticed. The default question was multiple choice. And when I switched it to first name, it switched the question type to short answer. So it uses some artificial intelligence to be like, did you want this question type? So you have this floating toolbar on the side. Let me just go through it really quick. The top option, the plus icon, is add a question. Top icon is add a question. If I click that, adds a question. And it by default adds a multiple choice question. I'm going to do last name. And it automatically says that shouldn't be multiple choice. It should be short answer, which is pretty cool. So they have found that you save a significant amount of time with this prediction of what question type. Now, once in a while, it predicts I want something I don't want. And I wanted it to be multiple choice, and it didn't think so. So I have to switch it back. But it's not a big deal. So again, to the right, I have this floating toolbar. The top one is add a question. The one underneath it is import a question. So you can actually grab questions from another form and bring them in. So this is a really good one. The import questions is I'll make a form that has a lot of questions for Unit 4. And then I want to make some quizzes off of this. So then I'll go and I'll grab 2 or 3 questions off of the Unit 4 quiz, the Unit 4 test maybe, and make some sub quizzes out of those same questions. The third one is add a title and description. That's not a question. So when you see this TT, it just adds some text. So if you want to give them a reading passage or just some information, you add the title and the description. You can add pictures to your form. That's the 4th option. You can add a video, but be warned, it is a YouTube video. It must be a YouTube video. For whatever reason, you cannot add a video from Google Drive. And then the bottom one is to add a section. Think about that like pages. So I have created a Google form. I made one before this, so I got it kind of set up just to be real basic. And I want to share this with you. Now, what you'll notice is that this has my toolbars as a send button. This is the edit screen. You do not want to give the edit screen to people. So there's two ways that I can give you this form that I already made. This eyeball up at the top where it says preview, you see this now looks like a form. Now looks like a form. It can be filled out. It's fill outable. Right? Whereas on the edit screen, it actually will not let me put in this email address. I cannot. I want to put in the first name. It will not let me answer first name. I'm typing, it won't let me. Because I'm on the edit screen, I'm designing the form. The eyeball takes me to the actual form. And if I take this link up at the top, notice at the very end of the link, it says view form. Look at the difference between these. I'm going to put it into the slides. Right? If I do the fill out form, it looks like this, where the very end of the form says /view form. The /view form. As opposed to, I'm on the edit view, you see it looks different. I can see the trash can, I can see the duplicate, I have the toolbar. I don't give this to people. You'll see the difference on this one, two things. Number one, it ends in edit. The other one ended in view form, right? The other thing you'll notice is the ID is different. You see this says, let's just look at it, starts with 1WA. And I go look at the form to fill out, it says 1FA. That's by coincidence similar. You see this ends in lowercase x, lowercase v, uppercase q. The editing one ends in capital O, lowercase n, uppercase u. They're all different. It's always different. Your ID numbers will be different than my ID numbers, like a lot different. So what they do is they just take a random, very long string of lowercase letters, uppercase letters, numbers, and apparently an underscore maybe, and put all these together and say, this is the unique ID for this form. So it makes it very hard for people to accidentally find your form. So they're pretty secure that way. You want to make sure that what you send somebody ends in view form and does not end in edit. So when I'm on the edit screen, I can click on the eyeball. I click on the eyeball, the preview, and I copy this link and I can share this link. So I'm going to put this into the chat. So I'm looking at the preview, I'm looking at the eyeball, I copied the link at the top. I'm going to paste this into the chat. If you could just fill that out for me, please. I will fill it out also. You're wondering what these blue things are? I have a Chrome extension for math. Yours won't have those blue boxes. You've all filled out a Google form. I know you have. I want you to see in here that I have 2 pages, 2 sections. I have a different section. I have a rate your ability question and submit. And how do I find, okay, so I submitted it. How do I find what people submitted? That is on the edit screen. So I'm over here on the edit screen. Do you see up here at the top where it says responses? I have responses 3. I have responses 3. So I click on the responses. I don't want to keep your email addresses on there, right? I can see the names, the answers to the first question. This gives me a summary. You see on the responses tab, I can see a summary of how everybody responded. Now, if I come up here, it also says summary, question, and individual. So there's the questions tab and the responses tab. So up here at the top of your form, when you're in the edit screen, Should be able to see the responses, and on there you can have a summary. That's the default. You can look at each response question by question, or you can look at each response as the full response. You can see I can switch whose I'm looking at. I'm going to go back to the questions. You'll notice that I always ask first and last name separately. The reason I do that is because if I want to look it up by last name, if I write Alice Keeler, then the field that I have, the response that I have, is Alice Keeler. How do I look up just Keeler? Not easily. So one of my tricks is I always ask for first and last name separately. So on your form that you created, you go back to that. Will you click the little plus icon in the toolbar to add a question? I'm going to add a question, last name, and you'll see down here at the bottom it says required, and you just click on it. You don't actually drag it, you just click on it. And we're going to click on it and make it required. Add in there twice. So, when I'm on the first name one, I can see the edit tools. I can see the duplicate the question. I can see delete the question. I can see to make the question required. This right here allows me to add a picture to the question, just to the right of the title of the question. But when you look at the last name question, you'll notice it doesn't have any of the editing things. I have to actually click on it and engage that question. Notice it turns blue on the side. If that's the question I'm editing, it's blue on the side. And the reason for that is this is actually collaborative. I can have more than one person edit the form with me at the same time, but this is dangerous. It's not dangerous to do with a Google Doc, and it's not dangerous to do with the Google Slides because I have version history. For whatever reason, Google Forms does not have a version history. I'm just going to double check that they didn't add it this week. No, they didn't. Okay. So if you're going to allow people to have edit access to your form, be aware that if they delete something, if they mess something up, it messes up your form. And it's kind of scary. Hey, Gabby, glad you could join. So that's the first basics is what did I do is I opened up a new tab. I went to forms.new. I named my form. I click up in the upper left so that the file name in Google Drive matches the title. I come down to Untitled Question. I changed it to first name. I came over to the toolbar and I add a question and I call it last name. I have these two questions. And if you want someone to fill this form out, you go up to the eyeball. You're going to go up to the eyeball. And you can see this form can now be filled out. And I copy the link at the top of the form. That's not the only way to do it, but it is one way. And this link at the top, you would email this to someone. You would hyperlink it in a document. You would use this link to help people to fill it out. And we notice that the right link to fill it out at the very end of the URL says view form. So I like using the eyeball because I'm looking at the form in the way, like that's what it should look like. I preview what the form should look like. I'm like, yes, I want it to look like that. And so then I get that link at the very, very top. The other option that I have is when I'm in the edit screen is I click on the send button. And on the send button, you'll see it has this checkbox that it's collecting email addresses. And it has this link icon. It has send an email, get the link, get the embed code. So these are the three ways that you could share the Google form. So I could just send it to you directly, just put in your email address. And I include, if you want, you can include the form so that the form's right in there. It's embedded in the email or not. It just sends them a link. You click send, clicking on the send button. Most of the time, honestly, what I do is I click this middle one with the icon and I click copy. And you'll notice at the end of this link, it says the view form. This is the view form link. And you have an option to shorten it. So you can do the little checkbox and make it a shorter link so it's not quite so ugly. So I can copy this. You see this forms.gle / and whatever this code is. That's the exact same. It's the exact same as this one, just shorter. Just shorter. Right, so the super basics, I do forms.new.
Hey, Alice, can we pause for a second? Alice, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So finish up your thought here, and then I want to go back to the edit.
Exactly. So, I do forms.new. I type my title. I click up in the corner. I add a question, first name. I click the plus icon. I do last name. I make them required. I toggle on the required. Then I either click on the eyeball or I click on the send. Where are we at, Kirk?
Okay, so click cancel on your screen, please.
Cancel, you bet.
And now go. Mine looks a little different than that, but maybe it's just because I'm moving my mouse around.
Right.
So underneath where it says first name,
Mm-hmm.
and no, go down. Yeah. So hover your cursor to the left of the word short answer text of that phrase.
Okay, nothing will happen.
Okay, so on mine, do you see those six dots that are in the center of that question field?
Yeah, that allows you to drag and move the questions.
Okay, so I have those 6 dots appearing on the left of the radial buttons.
That is because no, it's not.
Oh, if I change it to short answer, maybe that'll. Never mind. I figured it out.
Okay.
If you have a multiple choice, so I assume that is if it was multiple choice, then you could drag the answer choices into different.
Multiple choice. So let me add a question on here. We'll make this one multiple choice. What is your favorite color? And red, blue, green. So these grippy dots, as I hover, the grippy dots means I can move them. So you can see the grippy dots at the top lets me move the question. I can drag and move the question. Whereas the grippy dots on the answer choices let me reorder the choices.
Okay. So I have a couple more questions.
Please do.
Do what?
Yeah.
So I get it when you're saying that the best practice for most of the time as educators is to the first line to be require an email address. So if you wanted to send a Google form anonymously, you just would not include that as the first question?
That is correct. Although, and we can discuss this, even when I'm doing it supposedly anonymously, I still like to click the email just in case something went wrong. So I would write a note that says I won't look at it. Depends on what it is and how anonymous I need it. Just because I don't know about you, Kirk, but I make typos all the time. Like I meant to ask this, I didn't ask it, or they answer it, but then I didn't ask my question clear enough, and the way they answered it wasn't what I was expecting or what I wanted. So, sometimes I need to reach back out, not because I want to know who they are to connect them up, but because sometimes I just need to get some more clarifying information. So that's just a thought. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just telling you to think about it.
I was thinking about like if you wanted more honest answers, perhaps and people felt more comfortable not providing their email
What
address.
you're going to do is you're going to click on this settings tab right up next to the send button.
Okay.
And I want you to do this 100% of the time.
Okay.
When you make a new form, at least take a second to click on the settings cog.
Okay.
Okay. So you'll see here, that's where I have the collect email address.
Okay.
So if I turn that off, you'll see that goes away. So I don't ask for their email address. I go to the settings cog and I checkbox the checkbox to collect the email address.
Oh.
Now, requires sign in. I typically don't do that because what if I wanted a parent to fill it out or wanted to share it with a colleague who doesn't work with me? Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do require them to sign in, but this one that says limit to one response, I never do. I never do it. By never, I mean 99.99, because it doesn't matter the situation. One person has legitimate reason that they need to fill it out a second time. They're called to the office in the middle of class. You guys talked about it and you agreed. Yeah, they're going to retake it. I mean, there's just an exception all of the time. So checkboxing this limit to one response makes it difficult for me if and when I need a kid to do it twice. It doesn't matter. You know, the kids, they do this to me. They fill it out quickly and then they fill it out again with better answers, as if I'm so stupid that I can't tell that they just filled it out already.
Okay. So
I
just to be clear, you always check mark collect email addresses, or you
99
always leave it unchecked? Checked or unchecked?
checked.
Checked. Always checked.
I always do checked with a very rare exception, because even if I want it to be anonymous, I just put a note that I'm not looking at it and I hide the email addresses so I don't look at them. But just in case, and usually the just in case is that just in case I messed up, then I'm able to reach out and get some clarifying information.
So, okay, so this is a small rabbit hole. So when you get when you get a Google form that says I'm doing research, or we want your feedback, we want your honest answers, and there is no email address, but actually the creator of the form could have checked this box and they're going to know exactly who said it. No?
Now, if you restrict it to users at your school, it will grab the email address automatically, but it definitely lets you know. It's not secret. If you're
Which
filling
box
out,
is not
it's
secret?
your email, you will know. You will know. It's not a
Okay.
secret. Okay. If you don't click restrict it, then it asks for the email address and you could type in any email address you want. So the problem is with the anonymous survey, if I truly make it anonymous, then you could fill it out 10 times and really screw up all my data. Which is why I like to collect the email address just so I make sure they only fill it out once. Even if I'm still doing it anonymously, that I'm like, I just promise I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to hide the column. I just have it to make sure you only fill it out once. But I don't do limit to one response, just because there's reasons that one person has an exception and then it becomes ugly.
Okay.
One's down here to allow them to edit after submit. This is literally a waste of time and useless, so don't worry about it. And then how often do you want to let them see the summary charts? Not very often. So these bottom ones, respondents can, I very rarely check those. Very rarely.
Okay.
So on the general tab, I pretty much always have collect email addresses. Yes, there's some reasons I don't. It's just rare. And I rarely do restrict, and I almost never do limit to one response. And I pretty much never do these bottom two because that's for another one. If I want to get through making Google Forms in 30 minutes, which I'm already over, then
I'm sorry.
no, you're fine. I'm just saying we're just sticking with the bare bones basics today. So we'll call that a more advanced feature, okay?
Okay.
Click on the presentation tab. I want you to click on all 3 tabs every time. If you make a form, you're going to click on the settings cog, and all 3 times you're going to just double check these. You don't have to do anything here on the presentation tab. But I like to give students some directions. What do they do after they fill out the Google form? So I'll put something there. Do you want to be able to fill it out more than once? So by default, it says fill it out again. You're like, yeah, no. So you can just turn that off. These other ones are more advanced, so I'm just going to skip them. And on the 3rd tab, it says quizzes. If you want it to grade it for you, you make it a quiz. That's a whole different webinar. Today is just real basics. Basic, basic, basic. Okay? So I click on the settings cog every time, and you can click on send so that you can click on the link icon to copy the link, although I almost never do that. I usually do the eyeball and just get the link at the top. I'm like, yep, that's what I want it to look like. Looks good. So those are the basic basics. This is also pretty basic. When I add a new question, you'll see it defaults to multiple choice, and I can choose different question types. So if I want to do short answer, it's a small box. Paragraph is a bigger box. Check boxes, multiple select. Linear scale is rate on a scale of 1 to 10, right? And there's obviously other question types in there. So depends on the question you're asking, what type is it, and you would select that. Then you click the eyeball, and you get this link, and you give it to people, like, hey, fill out my form. And you have to know that all of it's in Google Drive. So I'm going to click on recent. I'm clicking on recent in my Google Drive, and you'll see these are the forms that I made today, right? This is the form, this is the sample, my form in Drive, here's my sample form. I made several forms during our demonstration. You find them in Google Drive. You organize them in Google Drive. You can put them in folders in Google Drive. You can add editors in Google Drive. Just like you would use a Google Doc in Google Drive, form is exactly the same. Under new, you'll see that it says Google Forms. So I can make a new form from Google Drive, and it saves it in Google Drive, and they're always saved in Google Drive. Regardless of how you make it, they're in Google Drive. So we had you fill these out. So where did the responses go? So from Google Drive, I go to Google Drive, I open the form in Google Drive, and then at the top it says responses. The top it says responses, and I can look at the responses in the form, or my personal favorite, do you see the spreadsheet icon?
Yes.
If you ask me, I always make a spreadsheet. Like, why would I not have a spreadsheet? I always do a spreadsheet. And when I click the spreadsheet icon, it says, do you want to make a new spreadsheet, or do you want to link it into a spreadsheet that already exists? Like, why would we make a new spreadsheet? I just hid the email addresses just so they're not so prominent in the recording. But you see, it shows me every time they fill it out, it timestamps it. There's no way to turn off timestamp. It always timestamps it. When do they fill it out? So what I mean, like, I don't restrict it to one answer because I can tell if they filled it out twice, and I can tell when they filled it out. I just don't count their second one. But if I had a kid who needs to fill it out a second time, it's not such a hassle. I'm like, yeah, fill it out again, and then I choose which one I count. All the questions are in the column headers here in row 1, and then the answers for each response are in each of the columns. Good night, Lauren. So those, Kirk, are the basics, the super basics of making a Google form.
I have one last, what I think is a simple question.
Right. Yeah.
So the title of this Google sheet is not the same, is or is not the same of the form.
By default, so like if I name this up here, I'm gonna make a new form. I like
Okay.
forms on it. Right? I make a new form and I call this, form, and I'm like, delete this form in Drive. Right? I'm just doing this because I'm going to delete it later. But I want you to see that what's in the upper left corner is the document title as opposed to the form title of what people see. The spreadsheet should match the document title. So,
The document title, not the file name.
so mine says form. So when I click here to the spreadsheet and I make a new spreadsheet,
Oh, but it gave you the choice to rename it.
yes, it does. When I make it, I can change the name. But it defaults to the name of the form file, which oftentimes is the same as the form title, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay.
But
And
they're
then,
all in Drive. All of it's in Drive. So when I go over here to Google Drive, see, here's the spreadsheet that goes with this form.
okay.
Yep.
Oh, I have so many questions. You might
Yep.
have intermediate levels 1, 2, and 3, and advanced levels 1, 2, and
Okay.
3.
This is super basic. So what I'd like you to do, Kirk, is I want you to make a Google form every day. This isn't hard. It's not a hard assignment. You are going to either go to Google Drive and do a new form or just do forms.new. Either way, I don't care. Same thing. And you just ask something like a warm-up question, some sort of a survey. It doesn't have to be a quiz. And you're going to click on the settings cog on your form. Every time you make a form, you click on this cog, the settings cog, just to double check all your settings. Just go through, double check them. And then you're going to click the preview eyeball, be like, yeah, that's what I want my form to look like. You're going to copy that link and distribute it. At the I'm just talking very basics, okay? Now, there's one more thing I would like you to do right now before we hang up. I want you to click on the 3 dots icon in the Google form, any Google form.
In the preview or in the
Edit screen. In the edit screen,
edit?
and go to preferences.
Preferences. Okay.
In the preferences, it says default to collect email addresses. Click that. And it's a default. So you only have to do this once. You do this today, you never have to do it again. So you notice when I do forms.new, it automatically is collecting email addresses. That's why.
So this is for every Google form I make from now on until I deselect it.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so, mine automatically does that. So that when I go to the settings cog, it says collect email addresses. The response receipt sends them a copy of what they answered. Usually don't do that. But I can turn it off, but it'll default to being on instead of defaulting to be off.
Alice,
you
on
give
that other one you just did, had the
Uh-huh.
make questions required. You ever click that one?
Oh, no. I mean, you
On
can
the
try.
email one?
It
Yeah.
really is just a matter of pick your poison.
Oh,
Do
okay.
you usually have if you're making a 50 question quiz test, whatever, which you should not do. That's a wholly different conversation.
Yeah.
But you got 50 questions. You have to go through and click required 50 times. Right?
Oh, okay. I didn't know
It
there was that make
That's
questions
where
required.
to the few questions that you don't require to toggle them off rather than. So I feel like for a lot of the things I'm doing, I don't necessarily have the questions required. I always want their names required,
Okay.
right? Emails required. If they have to finish it early and they didn't finish filling out the ones that are required, then it's
Mhm.
just you see the stress on that. I personally don't feel like I have it every question is required often enough that I want that to be my default. But I think there's a lot of people who would, that would be a time saver.
Yeah.
That's up to you, obviously.
Ours is only 10 questions normally, that's why.
They usually make the questions required.
Yeah.
Well, then
They
default.
wouldn't fill it. Sometimes they forget to fill it out.
Yeah, but if I'm doing a survey, I don't make all the
Yeah.
survey questions required.
That's
So
true.
I feel like, I mean, me personally, I think Google Forms is a terrible quiz tool. It's a terrible quiz
Mhm.
tool. Google Forms is the best thing since sliced bread, but for quizzes, it's so much clicking. And how I give feedback and all these other things is not great. So I rarely use it for quizzing,
Yeah.
and I usually use it more for check
Survey.
for understanding or things just for the students to fill out for themselves. You know, so they grades it, but it's not. I don't look at it. It's just for them. I otherwise I use quizzes,
Yeah.
and that's a personal preference. So my
I use it
personal
for social studies a lot, not for my ELA. Yeah, they use it for another content. I
so
don't like it. Yeah.
if you find yourself, go ahead and make the questions required. If you
Mhm.
find yourself undoing it, the default a lot of the times, then maybe you don't want it that way. So
Okay.
it's a question of, does this save you time or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kirk.
Okay, I think this is a basic question. So will you click cancel there?
Mm-hmm.
And then what will you go to preview?
Yeah, on the preview eyeball, super important.
So down in the bottom right-hand corner, I noticed the little pencil. What does that mean?
That gets you to the edit screen, and you're only going to see that if you have edit access. If you do not have edit access, like a student, they won't see they
Oh,
won't see
okay.
that.
So if I'm just sending it to my students, they won't see that little.
No.
And then let's just say you added another question.
Yeah,
Do you
sure.
have to go to eyeball again, or can you go back to just that tab?
Eyeball is the same length. It doesn't change.
So like you have all those tabs open at the top. So you could just go back to the tab that's the preview tab.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to refresh. So
Okay.
so like I give it to the students. They have it open. I realize I forgot something. I edit. I'm like refresh. It's a new form, but the form is always current. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So if I
Oh.
change it,
I'm
it'll
so excited. I made my first Google form in 2021. I'm raise the roof, everybody.
not live without Google Forms. Honest to goodness, it is really the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Because you know I'm going to be emailing you like, okay, how do I link it to other spreadsheets? How do I?
Yeah,
Okay. Thank
exactly.
you for hosting this.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Bye, you guys. Have a good
You
afternoon.
too.
You too.